Hey everybody, it's Stacy Barnett. I think this is a vlog. I don't know. I didn't want to do this as a live because this wasn't really like a question and answer thing, because I have my YouTube lives for that and that kind of thing. So I was just trying to figure out what the right medium was, and writing it out. Like I don't think I'm really going to be able to get my kind of talk about what I want to in a short post. So this is really interesting. I was looking at the responses to the post that I made about the really about the moral platitude of, and I used whether or not people were in it for the ribbons or not as an example. And I think I called it the fallacy of the higher moral ground or whatever. And what was interesting is that I observed something that probably should have been obvious to me, but I don't have a psychology degree, I have an engineering degree, so there you go. We all learn. Um, is that people, and I thought this is just a really good observation, and that's why I wanted to share it, is that people don't necessarily read what you write, and they don't necessarily digest it the way that you intend it. Very so what happens is that people come with their own narratives, and they will read what you write or listen to what you say, right? And they apply it to their own narrative, and that becomes how they hear it. So I thought it was just kind of an interesting observation. And you might be thinking like, yeah, well, duh, but it was a good example of that, because the post actually wasn't anything about ribbons. It wasn't anything about ribbons at all. It was just an example of a phenomenon that that I often see and that I was observing. And so I kind of wanted to talk about that a little bit more. And it was just kind of, like I said, an interesting observation because it wasn't about the ribbons. Um, I was more referencing what we say and the intent by what we say it, and how that actually can affect our own ability to grow. So if we take a moral platitude, or actually kind of like it's more about if you say something with the intent to make yourself look better, but you say something that feigns humility, for instance. And that's why the reason why I use the example of I'm not in it for the ribbons. Like, you could absolutely say that and mean it, and hey, that's cool, right? Like I said in the post, it's all about, what is your inner goals? What drives you inside? Pay attention to your own truths. Try to speak your own truths. And I wasn't clear about this because it was more an observation in humility. And I'm not saying everybody, like the whole humility thing, that's something that can actually be completely misunderstood anyway, because it's not about, humility is not feigning that you're not good. It's humility is actually, if you are good, you're good. And is being truthful with that. Like if you're good at something, what I mean by good, like you're good at something, you can be truthful with that. You can absolutely be good at something. It's the fake humility is the issue. And that's connected to that higher moral ground that I was talking about, where if we talk about things like, for instance, I'm not in it for the ribbons, right? If you say that with the intention of making yourself look good, then that's fake humility. And what that does is it actually locks you off from growing. And it's kind of like if you're saying like I'm not in it for the ribbons, it's because it becomes if you're saying it that way because you're trying to make yourself look good in the eyes of somebody else. And in some cases trying to make them feel bad. That's when it gets really, that's when I have a problem with it. when you're trying to make it to, say it in order to make somebody else feel less than by making yourself feel more than. So I use the ribbons as an example. It could be anything in life, right? But for instance, with the ribbon thing, if, and this is what I'm saying, like it could, like this fake humility can actually block you from learning, is that if you say, I'm not in it for for the ribbons, and you're actually on the inside thinking, I really would like to do better, and I'm not happy with what I'm doing. But you say, I'm not in it for the ribbons. What that does is it actually keeps you from growing, because it keeps you from having the conversation of, I want to do better. How could I do that? Again, this is just an example. So it was a little bit of, but that was kind of like what was in my head. And I had a really hard time putting that down into writing. And so, but then I'm reading all the responses. I'm like, I really didn't intend it to be about ribbons at all. It was more about people stating something and not really being truthful to themselves. And by doing so, which really is the link into false humility, actually, is because that blocks our growth. Humility is its own thing anyway, and I really think, to be a good trainer, you need to have humility. And humility, by the way, if we got to go down that rat hole, is about acknowledging your deficits and your strengths. That is humility. It's knowing what you're good at and what you need to improve on. Because if you can be honest with that, you can improve it. Now, granted, some dogs may not be able to do, the same thing as other dogs. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about whether you win or not. And this is why it comes down to the goal is important. And what you can do as a team, or looking at yourself as a trainer, what can you train? If that is really, what you're looking, and so it's really real humility is actually knowing and being honest with what you're good at and where you need to improve. And that's actually what comes down to, that's how you be a good trainer for yourself, and for your dog, because that is what opens you up to improvement, and that is what opens you up to growth. And when we say things that are moral platitudes, like, as an example, I'm not in it for the ribbons, it blocks us from having real humility. And so it's more conversation about that. It actually wasn't about ribbons. I don't really care if people want ribbons or not. I mean, it's not, I really don't care. As an instructor, you have a great day. I'm so happy for you, right? It actually makes my heart swell. If you have what we always call the PQs, right? Personal cues, and something that your objective for the day, even if you didn't qualify, was met, and you walked away proud of yourself, my heart swells too. So that's why when we think of things, going back to the source of what is actually real humility is actually the important piece of growth, and it's the important piece that we need to kind of pay attention to. And like I said, it was just interesting because I'm reading, the responses to this, and I'm like, some responses, I could tell, like, yeah, they read what I wrote, and some responses, I'm like, okay, that's fine if that, because that's your narrative. And I think a lot of times, I think I might have picked an example that kind of struck a chord too, because this is one of those conversations you see all the time on Facebook. I'm not in for the ribbons. Well, I like my ribbons. So I'm not in it for the ribbons, but I like my ribbons, right? And I think there's been so much of that conversation Seeing this a lot, that I think people actually I accidentally put people on the defensive with that, and that's not what the intention was. So then what happens was you came in with that narrative, like, "Oh, I've heard, I've been in this narrative, I've been in this conversation before. Now I'm reading this post and now I'm reacting to it." Right? Versus actually reading it like, "Oh, what does this say?" Um, so anyway, just some thoughts. And like I said, I don't really wasn't really quite sure what the best medium was for this because clearly writing it wasn't going to work. But it was also one of these things where I just want to kind of reflection is important. And so from a training perspective, the reflection, that's the piece, right? That's the piece that I want people to do, as an instructor, because the reflection is the most important part of training, if you think about it, because it's how we improve. And that's where that real humility comes in. So, anyway, I hope this was helpful. I guess this is a vlog. I've not done one of these before. So, let me know if you like it. Anyway, chat with you guys later. Okay, bye.